Yes, and of course trauma, we know trauma as the violence that we experience in this world, the physical, emotional, sexual violence that's around. But there's also trauma in the not being recognized or not being acknowledged, not being seen as what you know yourself to be when you're a fresh arrival on the planet, as I call it.
You're listening to the Living Proof Podcast, episode number 116. Welcome to the Living Proof Podcast, a lifestyle podcast hosted by me, Engrid Latina. Tune in for a fresh episode every Wednesday to hear authentic conversations on topics like intuitive living, claiming your power, personal growth, and mental and emotional well-being. With guests who are raw, ridiculously open, notorious for what they do, and all about less thinking and more being. It's centered around sharing meaningful, soul-filling conversations. Inspired by my recovery from an eating disorder and exercise addiction, I realized there was so much more life had to offer if I could just drop all the rules I was living by. My mission is to offer you tools, insight, and stories to help you on your journey, whatever that may be. So pull up a seat, because there's room for all of us at this table. And as always, take what you like and leave the rest. Hey, and welcome back to the podcast, the Living Proof Podcast. I'm so happy to be joining you today. I'm Engrid Latina, I'm your host, and I'm really pumped to either be in your headphones, maybe you're out on a walk, or maybe I'm with you in your car and you're on your commute. Wherever you are, just so happy to be joining you today. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. And if you are brand new to this podcast, I just want to extend a big warm welcome to you and let you know it really means so much that you decided to take a chance on me, because I know there's approximately 1 billion podcast episodes out there, or podcast shows to choose from out there. So just means a lot that you decided to choose this one, however you discovered it, whether you heard about it from a friend, because all of my regular listeners are so amazing, and you guys have done such a wonderful job of spreading the good word about this podcast to the people you love and care about, and maybe people who pop into your head when you're listening to an episode and you think, hey, I think they would love this. You guys have done such a great job at that. That's really how this podcast has grown, very organically, just word of mouth. And it really means a lot just to have you here. Of course, to all of my regulars who keep coming back week after week. You guys are some pretty amazing people. I'm so in awe of this community and all of the people that this has attracted. So just thanks for being here. Of course, if you feel called to, if these episodes resonate and serve you, then I would love to hear what you guys think. If you want to write an iTunes review, it means so much, and it really does help continue to get amazing guests just like today's on the show. And speaking of today's guest, I had the honor and serious privilege of connecting with Jeroen de Wit, and in his own words, he was put on this planet to midwife as many people as possible into living an authentic life. And I'm honestly so excited to share him with you guys today. Just his voice alone is so centering and grounding feeling. He has such a calming presence, and I feel like we really connected in this interview. And even though it was over Skype, I don't know what it was, guys. There's something really magical about this conversation. So helping people live an authentic life, how does he do this? He offers quantum healing hypnosis technique, otherwise known as QHHT. He offers energy healing and teaches about consciousness and meditation. And he grew up in the Netherlands, but as I mentioned, he now lives in LA. And he was trained in QHHT by Dolores Cannon in 2006 and has since regressed hundreds of people. His regression work has been featured in the Hay House book, The Boy Who Knew Too Much by Kathy Bird, which is going to be made into a movie. Yep, no big deal. No big deal there. Jeroen is certified in Reiki, emotional freedom technique, EMF, balancing technique, quantum touch, and he's also a Dolores Cannon Level 3 QHHT practitioner. He also holds a BA in art therapy and has his master's in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. Additionally, he has over 7,500 hours of experience studying energy healing or therapeutic techniques and working with individual clients or groups. I'm especially excited to dive into today's conversation with you guys and share this because it's not really anything we've ever talked about here on the podcast. And I love introducing you guys to just new ways of looking at things and just things that I'm exploring and into and curious about. So I really hope this serves you just as much as it's been piquing my interest. And so in this episode, we dive into the experiences we have as children and how they lend themselves to our spiritual purpose later in life. He explains quantum healing hypnosis technique, which was formerly known as past life regressions. We talk about the subconscious mind. We also talk about how generationally we are increasing planetary consciousness. And of course, we dive into one of my favorite topics of how trauma gets stored in the body. He also shares about bioenergetics, which I had personally never heard of and I'm very intrigued by. It reminds me a lot of somatic experiencing, but as a source of healing. Honestly, I could go on and on about the stuff we talked about, but I think with that, let's just dive right on into this episode. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with the lovely Jeroen de Wit. All right, so I am sitting here today with Jeroen de Wit, and I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I'm so excited to unpack all the things that I don't know if many of my listeners will have heard much about, but welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Engrid. I'm excited to be here.
All right, well, with that, I think there's so much on the table I want to dive into, but I think let's just start from the beginning. I feel like that chronologically makes the most sense. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your childhood? Because to see where you are now and what you do, I think it's just so interesting to kind of get a little piece of the background.
Sure. Do you want to focus in on something specific?
Yeah, if there was anything that kind of, because I know for me, my kind of what I do now and what I'm passionate about, and as you mentioned before we started recording, of spreading the message about mental awareness, and especially for eating disorder recovery, you know, my trauma, the darkness became my light. I think that there's that saying of, you know, when you have a crack or a wound, that's where the light shines through. So I'm just curious if you have anything that kind of resonates with that, if there was anything that happened to you that sort of created the light that you are now.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for specifying that. Well, I always thought that my childhood was extremely happy because I remember just, you know, I had my parents, and then there was no abuse. They were loving people. But later on in my late teens and early 20s, I just noticed that I had limitations in my life. I was trying to figure out a life that would fit me, that would be joyful, that I like to create, and I somehow wasn't able to. I felt like I was in a bubble, and I didn't have any way to sort of really interact with the world. And so what I found out later is that I was checked out. I checked out at birth, and then some smaller situations happened later. But I mean, this is all looking back at trying to make sense of my early life. So there was no abuse, but the symptoms that I experienced were of severe neglect. And this is not at all to blame on my parents. It's just when I came into this world, I shut down my circuitry. I shut part of myself down because of the harsh conditions on this planet. You know, given where we're all from my perspective, we are all God, source, creator, incarnate in the body, and we come to the planet with specific purposes. And so when I came, the experience of being born and the sort of lack of emotional nurturing that I experienced. I'm from a very cerebral, rational culture, the Netherlands, and my parents as well. They're from that kind of background, so they were reared just after Second World War, and the 50s and 60s, much like in the States, it was all about the doing and achieving and looking like the Joneses and getting your house and your wife and your kids and looking the part. So because they didn't really get to explore, this is from my perspective, to explore their own authenticity, they weren't able to be with me in that way as well. And so instead of me being able to authentically connect with myself and to know my own self-worth, I shut myself down. I was checked out. So I would be in nature like as much as I could. I remember feeling so much at peace, being out in nature, being with plants. I was very, very uncomfortable in group settings. I would always have just like one friend that I connected with. But in school, I always, what's the word? I evaded, or I try to get away from like group settings. Or I remember, part of class, we would sit in a circle and sort of share experience, and we'd have to speak up. I was mortified. I was mortified to be part of plays. I was so insecure. So not really understanding or not really thinking much about that. I just went through my childhood thinking I had an okay childhood. And it wasn't until my late teens and my early 20s that I experienced problems just creating the life that I wanted to create.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I resonate with a lot of things that you shared. Specifically, I love how you said that it's almost like that you didn't have permission to explore your own authenticity. And
yes.
That resonates so deeply, because I feel like so often we look back at our childhoods and we're like, it wasn't bad. Nothing really that bad happened. But
Right.
Then we get in, like you said, your late teens, early 20s. Sometimes for people, it's the late 20s and early 30s that you sort of have this like awakening moment of, why is this not working? Like,
Right.
Why is my life not working?
Exactly. And I think it's different for different people. Like, I found out, later in life that my personality is way more grounded in the sort of more etheric or ethereal parts of existence. That's where I really know myself to be. And so my brother, for instance, he's quite different. He works as an accountant. He has his, his partner and his kids, and loves to travel. He's way more grounded in this sort of, I call it, denser parts of existence. That's way more like his personality. But for me, I didn't really feel my home within myself and on the planet until I really embraced and acknowledged the more, sort of spiritual, ethereal parts of myself. And that didn't happen until much later in life, because our world doesn't really provide us with experiences, or, there's no mythology about it, or places where you can explore these things in general culture.
Yeah, for sure. It's not modeled for us
Exactly.
in culture
Yes.
or society at all. Like, how would you know that's even an option?
Exactly. Yeah, like there's no, in our elementary school, we're not sat down and taught like energy hygiene. What are you feeling in your field today? Or emotional awareness, or emotional, what's it called? Intelligence, or, how to interact with people and to
Right.
help process feelings that are coming up. None of that is part of our upbringing.
Yeah, which is hopeful. I'm hoping that's kind of changing as, meditation is being introduced into like elementary schools and things. But for sure, that must have been really challenging to have to kind of endure this kind of world that we live in, this more denser world, as you said, as a child, that's not your natural default settings.
Right.
That must have been hard.
It was, but at the time I was thought, I'm in a normal life. My parents physically take care of me, and they put me through school, and they're supported by what I wanted to do, or what I knew I wanted to do. But yeah, I was very lonely on the inside, thinking that was just normal. This is what everybody felt like.
Oh, that breaks my heart. Yeah, that's but I also I feel like most people at some point in their life may have felt that kind of that heavy loneliness, that something's, until they discover, the fit for them that isn't represented in society. And I'm actually curious, so when did that shift happen for you? And when did you start to discover, hey, I don't have to adhere to these rules that are going on in culture, and you stepped out of it?
Well, it didn't happen until much later in life. I mean, I did sort of rebel against what I didn't feel was right, but it was just the going away from what I didn't like. I didn't really know what it is that I wanted to do. So in my teens, I moved out of my parents' home when I was 16, and I dropped out of high school. I joined an alternative school that was completely democratic, and where we learned stuff like ariscopy and homeopathy and yoga and drama. And this is back in the 80s, so it wasn't, it was so much around as it is today. So I kind of went away from sort of normal society, because I felt like I was always looking from the outside in. But it wasn't until, I'd say, maybe in my late 30s and early 40s, I'm 48 right now, that I really discovered that I didn't have to adhere to what I had perceived as normal, or, society, people have different words for it, but that I could really create my own life.
That's so beautiful. And I'm curious more about this school. Like, did you know anyone who went to this school? How did you find out about this alternative way of teaching?
It's quite miraculous. I'm from a very small town in the Netherlands, close to the German border, and I was in a normal high school and just not liking it, sort of hanging out with the other misfits, or sort of, dropout prone kids. And one of my friends left school and went to this other school that was called, the translated word is self-willed. And it had been housed in a squat for quite a while, and the teachers were people had just graduated from, teacher training, or whatever you call that. And so they were all volunteers wanting to get experience, and you could choose your own, your own subjects, what you wanted to learn about. So it's completely, and it was, it was a lovely place. It was with other people that were, not the norm. And we got to explore art, and we would go on, activism days where we would go and protest against like multinationals, or it was very different from a normal school. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it was a bit of a sanctuary in a way too, for you to begin to entertain just new ways of thinking. And I love that. Thank you for providing that translation too, a self-willed school. I think that's such an amazing idea. I wish there were more of those.
I know, it was quite miraculous. We learned even how to grow our own food in the yard, and together. It was emphasis on doing stuff together. Yeah, it was quite miraculous. In such a random place, from such a small place.
But it's so interesting looking back on our lives too. But it seems that you were so meant to find it, and to be there.
That's why I think it's so miraculous, because it was right there where I lived.
Yeah, so convenient. So from this school where you were doing all kinds of alternative practices and being around, different people who thought differently, how do you think that played into maybe this like later shift that you had in life, that you didn't have to adhere to cultural norms?
You have such good questions.
Oh, thank you.
So because of how I experienced myself, I always felt like I was looking at society from the outside in. So this particular school kind of was a place from the out, it sort of confirmed, or it gave me a place to be on the outside, but still looking towards society, still feeling like I'm on the outside of it. I'm not really part of it. I'm in the fringes of it. But it did show me different ways of living, just different options that are available, that it's not all about, being in your little ticky-tacky house with your white picket fence and getting a job just to pay the bills.
I think that's so crucial that we have moments like that, or experiences like that growing up, where you see something alternative modeled for you. Because I know for myself, like, it's like you don't even know it's an option until you see someone else doing it, when you
Yes.
experience it or see like, oh my, that's a possibility. Like I didn't even realize that was an option. So
Right.
I think that's really incredible. So to kind of fast forward out of, you know, this era of your life, this season, into where you are today as you're so many things. So I'm wondering if we could actually, let's first start with the past life regressions, which is now more appropriately named quantum healing hypnosis technique.
Correct.
I'm wondering if you could share what that is for the listeners.
Sure. So yeah, it is quantum healing hypnosis technique. It was developed by the late Dolores Cannon. She started out as a sort of traditional hypnotherapist back in the 60s, and by accident, she was in the Midwest of the United States. By accident, she regressed somebody into a past life, and so there was no knowledge about past lives, especially in the environment that she was in. She was from a Christian background, and instead of being freaked out by it, she was fascinated, and so she started exploring, taking people to past lives, and she was successfully able to do so and documented it all. And so she, over the years, she modified the hypnosis technique to make it her own technique. And it was later on that she experienced that the past life regression sessions, as they were called at the time, they would also help to heal people. So she would take people into different lifetimes, and then it would come back to her and say, hey, this ailment I was dealing with is gone. And so she modified the technique again because she became aware of this other part of our being, which people know as the soul or the higher self. She calls it the subconscious mind. It's the part of us that knows it is God incarnate in a body. It's the part of us that is pure unconditional love, that is very, very wise, and that knows everything about our current lifetime and all the other lifetimes that we've had. And so during a QHHT session, we take people through different experiences from different lifetimes, and it's no longer called past life regression, because where before she experienced people really going into what we perceive as the past, later on people would go into future lifetimes or parallel lifetimes, or lifetimes where there was no time and space, maybe as an energy creator being, or aliens, or but also animals, or even I've had a client go into a lifetime where they were a big boulder that was wedged in between two pieces of rock. Wow. And then, or part of the atmosphere. So so she had to let go of the name past life regression and make it bigger because of this diving into the quantum part of ourselves.
Yeah, it was almost like past was kind of too limiting.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, so many things you just said are making light bulbs happen over here for me.
Okay, your brain's not melting. That's good.
No. I'm so excited. Okay, so the first thing I feel like that caught my attention was, the fact that she could take someone into a parallel life or a past or future, wherever, some other place other than here and now, and that it would heal something that they were suffering from an ailment. So could you be more specific, like a physical ailment? Was it like an emotional, like what would be healed? And was it healed like instantaneously, or was it something they just happened to notice like was no longer a problem several weeks later? Like I'm curious about that.
So it is very different per person, because we're all very, very different. So when we sort of create this stronger opening to the subconscious mind during the session, all of the issues that you mentioned can be taken care of: emotional, physical, mental, but also stuff that's going on in life. But it's not that this happens all immediately in the session or right after. The effects of them can be quite tangible and immediate, or more subtle and more spread out over time. And so, how to explain this? So it's really, the sessions are not about sort of to make a list of demands towards the higher self, like you're going to fix me now because now we're having this magic window that's open and I want it now because it'll make me feel more comfortable. It's rather the opposite, where we give the floor to the higher self and let it explain to us, let it inform our lives about what's the metaphysical backstory. Why are you experiencing these issues? What's the sort of the learning or the purpose of them? And if they can be resolved, how that can be done. oftentimes it can be just remedied right in the session, but sometimes, the higher self will say, well, you gotta, make some lifestyle changes here, whether it is, applying better self-care through diet or exercise, or, applying more self-love by exploring more things that bring you joy rather than to just force yourself to just work in a job that you don't like. So sometimes, lifestyle changes have to be made in order for you to feel better.
Right. So it's not magical, like.
It's not magical, spiritual Santa Claus. You get everything taken care of. No.
Oh, that's very good to hear.
It's magical in a sense that changes do happen, but we never know, how it's going to take place. If it's going to be remedied immediately, or it's going to be up to the client to help themselves further, or if it's going to be eradicated over time.
I appreciate you saying that too, because I think sometimes when people who have no background in any of this, they hear this kind of thing and they go, oh, that's so, the term woo woo gets thrown around, or, they just, it just sounds almost like too good to be true. But I think I love that you touched on, so it's like not ego driven. It is driven by the higher self.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And I love, is it almost like whatever happens to you, it kind of has to settle into your body too? I don't know why I wrote the word settle as you were talking. Is it like it settles into you, or I don't know.
Is that what I said?
No, you didn't say it. It just sort of came to me as you were speaking. I don't know.
So during a session, we have these experiences of different lifetimes. So most people see like visual imagery in their mind's eye, like you would sort of use your imagination. And so what it seems to be like from my perspective, as much as I know, is that this is just sort of the interface through which we connect with the vastness of our higher self. So I don't think we can, what's the word? We can understand or
articulate?
Yeah, no, or completely know our higher self, because it's in such a different dimension than we are focused in right now in this physical 3D world. So when we connect to the energy of it, I think we do this through the imagery that is being provided to us by the higher self, but it's not the totality of what we're connecting with. Because I'm saying this because sometimes I'll be in a session with somebody and we go through a past life, and then afterwards, issues have been cleared that were not even mentioned during the session. So it seems to be sort of working in the background to move and shift, people's energy fields around to release stuff.
Wow. I'm trying to wow. So the word quantum, I feel like, is becoming more popular to explain these types of things. And I feel like you're touching on that. So you're touching on the fact that it's kind of existing all at once. Is that what you mean? Like you
nothing... mean different lifetimes, you mean?
Yeah, or maybe you would be able to explain that better, because you mentioned aliens, you mentioned someone could be atmosphere, someone could be a leaf, like someone, I guess this is all more out there than, it's not concrete. It's not dense, as you said earlier too. So I'm wondering if you could maybe even elaborate further.
Sure. We're trying to understand this material from our human perspective, from our human thinking. And so if you were to read Dolores's books, if she always starts her first chapter about how this work gently stretched her mind, made it be more open. When she thought she just figured out one part of life or how the universe works, then she would be faced with a slew of clients that expressed completely different. And again, she had to modify her way of thinking about it. So this is what I've learned through this work, that I can try and categorize experiences, or, think in terms of like, well, if it doesn't work this way, then it has to work that way. That's very
binary
human.
Thinking.
Yeah, binary thinking, right. So, but in terms of all the different existences, what we're being told through the higher selves of other people, that there is no such thing as time or space, but that everything is happening in the now. My human mind, again, does not comprehend. Like, I cannot make it, and I cannot tell you that I know what this feels like, or that I understand this. The best that I can do is sort of the working model that I use is that we're sort of individuated parts of Source, God, Creator, and we decide to split off, and all of these different experiences, apparently right now or at once, to get to know ourselves in the doing of it, in the doing of these different lifetimes.
That was really beautifully explained. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
I'm curious, as you were speaking too, something that came to mind, when I was little, I remember I was raised Catholic. We'd go to church every Sunday, and I just remember being in church and seeing the stained glass windows with like the people with the auras around them. And I would see auras at church, like around all the people in the church, around the priest talking. Like I would see them, and I didn't know it was weird because it was on the stained glass windows, and I was like, oh, it's just a thing. Like, and then I realized as I was trying to talk to my parents about it, and they were like, you know, I don't think they told me, they didn't say that's weird or you shouldn't see that, or, you know, but they didn't say it explicitly, but I sort of learned that wasn't normal. That wasn't something like everyone saw. So right. I think it went away for a long time. But I'm curious here if you've ever worked with like younger children, or if they seem to be almost like more susceptible, or not susceptible, pliable in a way, or just like more open conduits to this. Like, I'm curious. And to kind of finish that too, like I've started to see auras again as I've been doing all this self work.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
Yeah, it's come back, and it's not as frequent as it was when I was a child, but it is back, which I'm very grateful for.
Really, I love your subject matter. It's really nice. So yes, the younger generations, they're easier to work with. They're much more susceptible to this work because they haven't been dinged around as much as older birds, you know,
right.
have been around for a couple of rounds. So, yes. And also what we're noticing is that the younger generation carries sort of is able to bring in a higher frequency of consciousness. So where the people that are older, you know, I'm from the early 70s. Me coming in, I had to go through all this sort of diminishing experiences and transform them within myself to help change the fabric of our psyche on the planet. You know, me being one of the anchors of, you know, as are other people, to slowly sort of digest the density and then transform it into a lighter one in order for, you know, the newer generations to come in being able to hold a higher tone or a higher frequency within their existence. So they do come in from, like, younger generations often do not have any earth lives. They just come in straight from source or from other existences that are less dense. Or if they have had lots of different earth lives, then they're able to carry more wisdom or more knowing or more heart-centeredness into this lifetime.
What do you think has been causing? Is that a trend you've been seeing?
Yes, actually, Dolores Cannon, she wrote a book about it. It's called Yes, it would be interesting for you to look into it. It's called 3 Waves of Volunteers, and I haven't read it, but she's mentioned in these different ways in her different books that I have read. But she noticed that there were 3 different waves of kind of clients that she noticed that were that come onto the planet. The first wave, I think, was right after the war, and what she would learn through, and what I've learned as well through the subconsciousness of my clients, is that different, say our people from outer space, you know, our alien brothers and sisters, they had been looking at Earth and they saw that we detonated the atomic bomb. And it was kind of like, oh my God, the kids found the matches. We have to do something before they blow themselves up. So decided was that they would incarnate their people onto the planet to help raise the frequency and to shift out of the density of, you know, ego-based existence into a more heart-centered existence. And that seems to be what the trend is. And so the first wave she identified came in right after the war, and they had kind of a difficult time, I think. And then the second wave, I think, is my generation. And then the third and the waves coming after, you know, a little bit of a more easier time, or less of a need to take on the difficulties or the density of the planet, but being more authentic from the get-go. and expressing authenticity and having more access to abilities like seeing auras or telepathy or being very empathic. Being more grounded in the less 3D aspect of our being.
That's really interesting too, because my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, ever since she was a child, she wasn't able to see auras, but she would see like my grandmother, my grandfather, from both sides, and she would just say like, "Oh yeah, grandma's here in the room with us," and she would tell my parents, and they were like, and she would describe her appearance to them, and it was like no way she would know what they look, and just weird things like that. And she's always still now receiving messages, and they come talk to her, and she's not always like wanting to talk to them, but
right.
I think that is interesting. We both received those kinds of, I don't know if I want to call them gifts, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, oftentimes these kind of abilities are seen as sort of special or a gift, you could call them, but they're sort of placed in the in a sort of special category. But they're really normal, and I really would like for everybody listening to know this, that it's not normal that we, as a society or on the planet, our planetary consciousness has been about, has understood life as that we are physical human beings having human experience. We have to get jobs in order to buy the food and to be comfortable, and then we push out some kids, and then our lives are over. And to think that is what life is all about. We're not human physical beings; we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So, just the sort of sleep state that society or consciousness on the planet has been in for probably millennia doesn't make the experiences that you and your sister had abnormal. This is a normal expression of who we are as multidimensional spiritual beings, and thank God more of us are coming in with those dormant abilities that everybody has, but more awakened, and it's becoming more normal now.
Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we need to understand this, that what we've been living in is not normal. Even though the whole world probably still thinks it's normal, but it's not. It's a very limited way of experiencing ourselves.
Yes, I think it's like we've been suppressed because we're trying to adhere to these man-made, ego-based rules that were created, generations and generations ago.
Yes.
To keep us small and to keep us from our authentic selves, as you mentioned, And I'm curious because recently, this is pretty recent in the grand scheme of things, 2.5 years ago, I had an emotional experience that kind of dislodged, so to speak. This pain started in my low back and hip area, and I'm a personal trainer, so my ego was very pissed off about this, and it was very frustrated about this. And, it seemed like the more I tried to fix it with all my man-made tools and ego-based tools, like the worse it got. And it just kind of stayed with me always. And so, it's since I've had a lot of energy healing and body work done on me. And so the pain is reduced significantly. It's moved to different places before, but overall I'm significantly better. But I'm curious because you mentioned this in another interview, and I forget which one, but you were saying how when we experience trauma, we lose parts of ourselves or we close off to them. And when we go through healing, we're acquiring those lost parts of ourselves. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, that sounds accurate. That sounds like something I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. I didn't come up with it. You said it. And I'm curious if you could speak more to that and explain that further.
Yeah, sure. So it's based on experiences that I've had. I had a very gnarly sort of spiritual awakening in the mid '90s, and after clearing the immediate debris of that, I realized that I didn't have any true access to my feelings through who I am. It was very emotions based, and so I remember internet was just around, and I started Googling, and I found this therapist that did bioenergetics, and bioenergetics is a form of body-oriented therapy where your body is placed in sort of grounding positions where the energy of the earth sort of starts moving more through your body, bumping up into blocks, emotional like traumas that have been held in the musculature of the body. And so I started doing this, and this is what I experienced. So I would be put in sort of grounding positions, which meant like my knees were a little bent and I had to do breathing. And then physical pain would start to emerge in my legs where my muscles were getting tensed. And then when I couldn't bear the physical pain anymore, it would switch over into emotional pain. And when I started crying, not knowing why I started crying, it would sort of change into my body. Like I remember one time my arm started reaching out for my mom. Like I felt myself to be in like a, what do you call it? Like a pen or a den. And I could see my mom like standing away from me, like she was doing dishes or something. And I was just crying and crying and crying for her. So these old emotional needs that were not met, they were re-experienced, and in the experiencing of the trauma was released.
That's so. Thank you for speaking. Yeah, no, thank you for speaking to that. And I find too that as I continue to work through these things, and tell me if this is accurate or not, I almost feel like as you mentioned, you're reaching out, like probably imitating what you were doing as a baby in your little crib or pen or whatever, reaching out to your mom. I almost find myself even acting out emotionally more as like a child in ways. It's like it's trying to heal itself, I guess. Like, is that big? I don't know if that's making sense. Like I had like a meltdown with my husband the other day, and I eventually moved through anger and then into sadness. And when I realized I was sad, I went to him and I said, could you hold me? And he held me like I was, a little child. And I just wept.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But, it's just things like that have been surfacing.
That's really beautiful. It sounds like you're really tending to these wounded places in yourself, and that you have the confidence and the ability to ask for help and to be vulnerable with him. That's really beautiful and very, very helpful, I think.
Thank you. Yeah. And I had never heard of bioenergetics until I listened to a few episodes of other podcasts you had done. And so it specifically works. Like I've heard of TRE, which is the trauma release. Okay. And that's all about the shaking and the release through, physical shaking. And then, there was one other one, somatic
body work or something.
Yeah, I think it's like somatic energy healing or somatic body work. Yeah. It's like therapy, but like it sounds kind of very similar to bioenergetics, where it's like therapy but with the body element of it. Yes. So bioenergetics specifically works with like those blocks that we may or may not be aware of. Mm-hmm. Okay. And
you're asking me?
Yeah.
I'm very bad at like the theory of things. I'm not well read in that respect. I just go by my own experience. So I don't know what the specific differences are. But when I had a friend, she was enrolled in TRE. When she explained it and we practiced it, it was very similar to bioenergetics.
Okay. Then I feel like I understand it a little bit more. Thank you. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to, just for listeners, how does trauma get stored in the body and what it may look like if it's not addressed? Because I think a lot of us don't realize, before I awoke to all of this, this pain that was kind of manifested in my body all of a sudden, I was, I thought I had it all together. I thought I was doing all the things that society was telling me. I didn't have pain I wasn't aware of. Like I just was very unplugged, so to speak. I wasn't really present with what was going on. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
I'm guessing at it because I don't really know. It's just little bits of information that I've gathered.
Yeah, just
about
from your experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it starts, part of it is the non-life affirming systems that we find ourselves in our society today, that we're kind of cut off from each other, from community. When you look at more indigenous cultures, there's way more togetherness, there's storytelling, there's holding, there's spaces for processing trauma or crying things out and doing that together. I mean, not in all cultures, but there's cultures where they do that. I remember my EMDR therapist, she studied with these indigenous tribes, and she was telling me about these, and it sounded like more affirming spaces for people to just immediately sort of process it. Where we in our society today, I think, through the traumas and the generational traumas that have been around, and how society's been shaped, that there are no spaces, in our everyday life where we get to be with experiences that are difficult, that are challenging. And so if there's nobody with us to process these experiences with us, we kind of shut them down. It's like your child crying because they're hungry, or they don't feel right, or if they got the diapers on, weird, or they have a poopy diaper, or whatever it is. You're not attending to them, then what we start to believe is that there's something wrong with us, maybe because we're not being attended to. We're kind of shutting ourselves down, and so we're kind of splitting our own light. That's what I think that we do. That we come in knowing that we are having the experience that we are source in a physical body, and then being with these people that have their limitations, our parents and our culture, and then as a result of it, we start judging parts of ourselves and splitting our own light. And then, if there's difficult experiences that are happening, we don't have most of ourselves available to start with. But then if there's no other people around us to hold us and to help us process through the experiences, then, I think the best way what we can do to survive is sort of close it down and stuff it away. I'm not quite sure. I mean, this is what I've read. It goes into the musculature. That's a word that I remember hearing from the theory of bioenergetics. But it's like we close down. It's like we live in this grand mansion, which is our body or our life, and then we close the door to certain rooms when we don't want.
I think you explained that so beautifully. I don't think you need to have anything more than your own God-given experience there to explain that. That was really beautiful.
Thank you for affirming that.
No, it really resonated with me. I think, you said it so well that it's like we need, I love that you touched on, it's almost like if we don't have another being present with us, if we're alone, that we don't have someone to hold emotional space, we don't have someone to hold physical space, that's when we close those doors and we just start to compartmentalize things because we don't know it's safe to feel and walk through those emotions.
Yes, and of course trauma, we know trauma as the violence that we experience in this world, the physical, emotional, sexual violence that's around. But there's also trauma in the not being recognized or not being acknowledged, not being seen as what you know yourself to be when you're a fresh arrival on the planet, as I call it. Which is a unique expression of you're a unique expression on the planet. And unfortunately there's not a lot of spaces yet where little babies and kids are seen as that, but instead they're being prepared to go into society, to get a job, or to fit the image of what it means like to be a little boy or a little girl, or depending on different cultures where you're from, or different ways of thinking that are out there that little kids have to fit into, that they're being made to fit into, and kind of losing touch with their own magic.
Yeah, like how I stopped seeing auras.
Exactly, you got it. That's a beautiful example.
I just shut it down because that doesn't conform to our societal norms. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's no, I think you said that really beautifully, and it's so interesting too, the relationship. I don't know if this is even accurate, but just how quantum and space and just the holding of space and the feeling of spaciousness of being able to take up space. I don't know, all those things are just kind of coming to the surface in my mind as you said all that.
Oh, I haven't really considered that. Maybe you should tell us about that.
Well, I feel like I don't know if I feel confident enough because I don't know enough about quantum physics, because I just know that all the rules of Newtonian physics don't apply. It's more or less the opposite of what we've come to know as our earthly laws of physics. And I don't know, it's almost symbolic to me in a way that I, for so long, like you as a child, just learned to make myself smaller, and that I wasn't allowed to just be who I really was, because that didn't really conform and congeal to what everyone thought I should be.
Right.
So I just made myself smaller to take up less space. And I don't know, it's coming to mind. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that.
I think it's really important because, as we're noticing that you and I, we're two people connecting right now. We've had sort of similar experiences, or there are parallels, but we've had our very own journey with them, and we've come up with very unique ways of processing this trauma and getting back into our own wonderfulness, our greatness, and in our very own way. It's a very valuable journey, I think, because we all gather different bits and pieces about how to do this, and in turn, when we learn how to do this for ourselves, we can hold space for others to do the same thing. And you're doing this in your own beautiful way, as am I.
Yeah. Oh, that just reminds me of the light in me sees the light in you. The
That's
namaste.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Namaste. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think with that, I almost am like tempted to. I feel like we ended on such a good note. I don't even know, but I did want to ask you one other thing. How, or has this even ever been a problem for you? Because I feel like you have done so much inner work, but I am curious, just as someone who is a body worker, who works with people, is this ever a thing where, because I almost feel like, my ego would pop in sometimes and be like, I hope they're satisfied with this experience I'm providing for them. But I don't even know if that even comes into your consciousness as you're working with somebody. Are you just there as an intuitive and holding space and tapping into your higher self?
Oh, no, this comes up for sure.
Okay.
I mean, I got certified in Reiki back in 1999, and then I started doing this work with Dolores Cannon in 2006. No, sure, those thoughts creep up. Yeah, they totally do. I mean,
you're human.
Yeah, totally. I've been formed a certain way. There's certain habits as well, and I've gained much in confidence, and it's I call it really true confidence. There's a place inside of me where I really know myself, and it's a place I can go back to. But there's other parts of me that are still, that are sort of formed by my wounding, and those sort of sometimes, take part in the conversation, and they bring up sort of doubtful things. The difference is now that I don't always have to believe them. I can see them happening, and then I say, okay, well, this is what's coming up, and I know what I've been through in this life, and it's understandable, but I don't have to believe it. That's not the truth of things, even though I might have an emotional response even to it, like where, I might feel less confident for a moment. So yeah, certainly that comes up. I mean, I think that's part of being human. It's complex.
We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that too, because it does sometimes. I mean, I get into my comparison head of like, oh, well, they just must be so woke that that's not a thing anymore for them. But I appreciate you just sharing that and being so honest.
No, I think it's really about like moving forward with all of these, experiencing all of these parts of yourself, and then I'm really glad that I've sort of found a track that is really, well, I haven't found it. It's coming forth through me that I can stay on, that is really, really me. And then so these sort of more limiting thoughts that I might have every now and then, they're not the norm anymore. They're now in the fringes, in the periphery, and I'm just moving forward.
Yeah, like you get to kind of leave them behind a little bit. They don't matter as much.
I know that they're not true. So
yeah. Well, I wanted to hit you up with the wrap-up questions before we end completely, and I wanted to start with what's something that you recently learned about yourself or have relearned?
Oh, okay. So we're getting way into like woo-woo right now.
Yeah, go for it.
What I recently learned is, well, it's interesting. This is about depression. When I started therapy, when I lost my partner, it was 7 years ago. My therapist at one point said that I had been depressed all my life, and so she explained the symptoms, and yes, there was depression present. And so I worked through, the biggest sort of emotional debris of it. And then later on, I would notice that I would get anxious or have certain sort of really difficult feelings if I were to be in public spaces. And so what I learned is that there is sort of a kind of a portal inside of me, that there's a lot of light coming through it, and that disembodied spirits seem to be attracted to it. So this is a thing of my life right now where what I'm learning to deal with, that I'm having to work on a different set of boundaries where and to learn how to clear myself from those beings.
Wow.
I know it's quite a subject to breach, but that is important.
You threw it right at the end
right now. Yeah.
Oh man. Wait, disembodied spirits? So just spirits that come to you that you have to learn to create boundaries of, I don't necessarily want to engage with that. Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah. So these are people that have died and they haven't moved on to the next plane of existence. They kind of linger around on the earth plane, and apparently I'm a ping on their radar, and they come flocking to me. And then I feel their feelings of despair and franticness and paranoia. And my husband, he's an amazing SEO marketing specialist, but his secret talent is that he's an amazing Akashic Records reader, and so he helps me out quite a bit.
Oh my goodness. See, I've keep hearing about the Akashic Records. I've not learned as much as I would feel people comfortable like speaking to right now, but is that okay? I don't know if you can even summarize that in a short way. Is that something that what are the Akashic Records?
My friend and colleague, Helen von der Heide, she had a beautiful description of it. She called it a vibrational archive. It's a vibrational archive. Some of my clients, when they go into their sessions, see it as an actual library, a giant, grand library with records of all of our experiences everywhere. And so when you learn how to read the Akashic Records, this is a technique that you can learn. It was developed by Linda Howe, I think her name is. You tap into them, and this is something that we can all do. And you can get information, so you can ask for information and get it.
Wow. So you are able to kind of tap in and ask, these disembodied spirits to leave you alone?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring out how to create. I mean, it's much better now. Like before, it would happen every other day, but now it happens maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month. It's a journey for me to learn about different boundaries, more sort of energetic boundaries, and also what my circuitry is about. I'm not quite sure of the purpose of having this portal yet, but yeah, it seems to be a thing that is very present in my experience right now.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. I feel like I have more questions, but I'll go to the next one. What book do you gift most often to people?
Oh, I mean, it changes, but right now I am gifting, it's called Initiation by Elizabeth Haig. It has a white cover with an Egyptian sort of bird-like creature on it, and it's an account of a woman from Bulgaria in the 20th century who spontaneously went into past lives, and it's just an amazing story of connection and different lifetimes, and of opening your mind to all of the subject matter.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. Thank you for sharing that one. Mm-hmm. All right, next question is, what belief, practice, or habit have you stopped doing most recently?
Oh, what belief, practice, or habit? I mean, the first thing that comes up, and it's not very recent, but it's the first thing that comes up, is like working out like a maniac to have like the perfect body. I mean, I used to spend 2 hours in a gym almost every day to have a certain body, to attract a certain guy. But, when I came more into my own, I realized that I do not like the gym, more power to you. If you love, going at it in the gym, I don't like the routine. I don't like the monotony of it. So I do go to the gym when I feel like it. And it's usually at times when there's nobody else there, like in the middle of the night. But I go hiking quite a bit. I love being in nature. And then I do a bit of like weights at home or in a gym. I try to try to mix it up, but I don't force myself into places. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. I don't force myself into places where I don't find enjoyment anymore. I really am focused on the joy.
That's so beautiful. I had anorexia and an exercise addiction, so I completely resonate with that. And I've been restoring my relationship with exercise too. And that's so beautiful to hear, because I came to that realization too, like, wait, I don't have to suffer. I don't have to do something I don't enjoy.
Exactly. And then wait for, have a payoff later. Like, no, I just go for the joy right now. Do something that, I do like moving my body. I love to dance. I love to be out in nature, and I love the activity. I just don't like the monotony of it and like counting weights, and it's not for me,
Oh, that's beautiful. Amen. All right. The last question. What are you living proof of?
I am living proof of that, kind of what we spoke about. I am living proof that we do have permission, and that you can follow your joy, and you can acknowledge your own uniqueness, that it's not about being normal, but it is about expressing your unique self. That is what I'm proof of.
Jeroen, this was a beautiful conversation. I so enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time today and for coming on the show.
Same here. You had such amazing questions. I love going to the places where you took me. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
What did I tell you guys? Wasn't he amazing? I learned so much from this episode. I felt so connected to Jeroen, and I'm just so glad that he was able to be on the show today. I get questions and comments quite a bit asking how I even find my guests and where do I find these people, and they're so amazing, and where do you come up with your ideas for the guests that you have? And quite honestly, I just follow the breadcrumbs of my own curiosity, and sometimes that is through Instagram. I just search a hashtag, or I search just a topic of interest. And sometimes it's word of mouth recommendations. I try not to, I think there's a lot of podcasts out there that just interview all the same people, and it's like a cycle of all those same kind of conversations. And I really try to provide you guys with variety. And so I really hope this conversation was able to do just that. And if you're curious about Jeroen and you want to connect with him more, you can find him over on Instagram at Jeroen is Love. And his name is uniquely spelled just like mine, so I definitely understand. His name is spelled Jeroen is Love. And again, all of these handles and links that I'm mentioning will be in the show notes for you guys for easy access. And you can find him at Facebook under the same handle. And if you're curious and you're in the LA area, he offers group monthly regressions at Den Meditation, Liberate Hollywood, and Bindu Point. And of course, to make a private appointment with him, you can just visit his website, JeroenQHHT.com. And I know you guys, my regulars, love the trial and triumph. That's my little form of a life update that I share with you guys. I get so much great feedback that you really enjoy that part of the podcast. I am going to just skip on that this week. But of course, if you haven't already heard and tuned into, I started a second podcast with one of my best friends, Georgie Morley. It's called Gal Pals. It's over on iTunes. Georgie and I are both self-proclaimed overthinkers, and we love diving deep into the topics that you might talk about like in therapy, except it's not with a therapist, you're with more of like a best friend vibe. This podcast is definitely where we are both sharing very real-time things that we are processing and working through. So if that is something that sounds appealing and sounds interesting to you, then I highly suggest heading on over to Gal Pals. I hope to see you guys on over there, and until next week, may you continue to be living proof of your truth.